I want to first thank some dedicated public servants, Candy Russell and Justin Elks. They went beyond the call of duty. We went up to the micro center up in Gloucester, looked up all the old files from the Gene Stees file. My staff, Connie and Mariah, were up there and they put the presentation together, and I'm just speaking on it today. So a lot of work. I've talked to Judge Goldsberry. He knows everything about everything, so I got some background from him on some information. So let me get you to the setting. The setting is 1962. Bonanza, Gunsmoke, Leave It to Beaver, and the Andy Griffith Show. It is fall in 1962. What a lovely time of year in Athens, Ohio. Beautiful weather. The leaves are changing. Homecoming is coming up. There's one thing that disturbed homecoming, and that was this case. And I have titled this, Murder Most Foul. The Hunt for the Killer Professor. It was a classic love triangle. Gene Stees, age 30 at the time, a professor of education at Ohio University, and his wife, Helen, 30. They had separated because of his dalliance with a third woman, Patricia Weathers. She had caught his eye. She was married with 3 children, 10, 8, and 4. Local newspapers described Weathers, I love how they described it back in the 1960s, as svelte, doe-eyed, beautiful, and a slender brunette. That comes right from the newspaper articles. Gene Stees was described as 5'7" and balding. Gene and Helen, his wife, had met at Grace College, a fundamentalist college in Indiana, where they both were students. They were married in 1956. Helen was a nurse, and she had worked her way to put him through school. He obtained his master's degree from the University of Indiana and began working toward his doctorate in education. He had a little bit of background in architecture also. We'll talk about his varied history when we come to the defense of this case. During the course of their marriage, Gene and Helen had 2 children, Billy, who was age 6 at the time, and Kathy, age 5. While attending classes at Indiana University, that's after Grace College, Stees met Patricia Weathers, the svelte, doe-eyed, slender brunette. And they became lovers, but they didn't say that during the trial transcript. They became friendly was the term. Very interesting. She later testified in the trial that she was told by Gene Stees that he was getting a divorce. And his wife had actually filed for divorce in Indiana in August of 1962. After the divorce was legal, they said they would get married. A few months before the murder, this would be in August of 1962, Gene Stees took a job as an assistant professor in education at Ohio University. He was working on his dissertation. He was just a month or so away. Helen, his wife, was typing up his dissertation during this period of time when they would reconcile and not reconcile. He rented a small farmhouse on Baker Road. That structure is still standing. It's Dr. Maine's old house out by Fox Lake. Fox Lake wasn't there at the time. That didn't come into existence till 1969. He moved temporarily in there, and with him was his lover, or the friendly person, Patricia Weathers. On October 20th, 1962, Helen, who was then residing with her parents in Ashland, Ohio, arranged to meet her husband in Columbus, and he was going to take her down to the homecoming festivities here in Athens on that date. It was a Saturday. She told them that she told her parents that she was hoping that they could work on their problems and reconcile. Weathers had lived with Jean Stees for approximately 1 week to 8 days. At the end of August, beginning of September, she left the day after Labor Day. And she was picked up by her husband here in Ohio. He collected her and her 3 children and picked them up and took them back. Gene Stees had met with his wife then, and then that happened in September, obviously. Gene Stees then met with his wife in Columbus and drove her to the home on Baker Road. The next day, when Helen did not come back, her parents called the police. The investigation started on October 21st, 1962. Investigators found the pool of blood in the Stees station wagon. Stees initially denied having anything to do with his wife's disappearance, and at the beginning of the investigation, after police found blood in the station wagon, Stees was arrested on that Tuesday, not charged with murder originally, charged with the offense of cohabitation with another woman. So that's called a holding charge. So basically, they didn't have to say he's charged with murder. That was something to keep him in jail. Sometimes those things happen today on minor charges when you're holding somebody for a more serious charge. Then, at that point in time, obviously, when he got into police custody, he was talked to and he admitted the crime. This was pre-Miranda. Miranda was 1966. This was 1962. But his confession was rendered to be voluntary. Go ahead and show the next one. Okay? And he pled innocent to his wife's murder in the court of law. So at that point in time, he's charged with murder. He confessed to doing it. And I'll tell you about the details of what happened. When they talked to him, the police, Harold Shields, they talked to him and they said, "Where's your wife? We found blood in your car. It's in the back. Where is she at?" And they were thinking it was in the pond in back of his house. Wasn't there. He finally confessed and told them that he had hit his wife's head with a crowbar, then, while she was bleeding, put a bag over her head to contain the bleeding, and then took a 55-gallon drug from the main property and stuff her inside of that head first. I always ask, where did the drum come from? It was Dr. Maine's daughter's riding barrel for barrel riding with the horses. So that's what she had used those for. And then in the summertime, they painted the barrels yellow on the outside, a stripe around it, and put it in the pond with a raft on top of it affixed. And they used that out there. And so it was the fall, so they had the barrels available at that point in time. So he stuffed her in the barrel, put holes in the barrel, affixed the top of the barrel, put it in there, and then threw in a bloody rug, and then took it in his station wagon and drove it out to the lake, Dow Lake. When he got to Dow Lake, he then got out of the car, put the barrel there, and then drove his car back to Athens. If you've ever done that trip, it's a long trip down Columbia Road. And so he parked somewhere at a friend's house and then walked back that day, that evening, and secreted himself until he could find a time when there was nobody around, took the clippers that he had from a friend's house, clipped the rowboats that were there, put the drum into the rowboat, rowed it to the end of Dow Lake, the deep end, threw the barrel into the water at that point in time, put the rowboat up on the south shore where the dam is today, climbed up over the dam, and walked back into the town, passed through, at that time, the old Ohio University Airport, which is down there by Walmart and Kroger's and so forth, and then went back to his friend's house and drove home. And that was on Sunday. That Sunday, he also got up and he had to go do a lecture on Monday. So he drove to another professor's house who was ill to get the notes for the lecture at the education department for Monday. And he looked and he saw he had the crowbar in his car. And he took the crowbar and threw it into the Ohio River as he was traveling to Marietta. He got the notes, came back. One thing he forgot to take care of was the blood and the blood stains on the mat in the back of his car. So he went and actually taught 2 classes on Monday, October 22nd. The police came out on the 23rd to speak with him, and that's when he got arrested for cohabitating with another woman so they could do the blood test, match the blood type to his wife Helen, and then eventually take him to the grand jury, go ahead, and get him indicted. He was indicted for aggravated murder, and the charge reads that he unlawfully, purposely, and with deliberate and premeditated malice killed Helen Stees, contrary to and in violation of 2901.01 of the revised code and against the peace and dignity of the state of Ohio. Now, what do you do if you're a defense attorney and you get a case like that? I told you all those facts. It's all slam dunk. Case over. You have no defense. Is that correct? Well, you're wrong. I've looked at the parties in this case. Judge Bolin, as described by Judge Goldsberry to me, a bit gruff, but a very good judge. He gets an A+ in my book for conducting a good trial. Homer Gall was the prosecuting attorney at the time, gets another A. And Joe Yanity gets another A for his performance. I'll talk to you about the only person who gets an F, and that is the Ohio State Penitentiary, and we'll talk about that later on. So this was, I have the trial transcript. We went back and got it, and as much as we could find. I have the closing argument from Homer Gall, which I intend to read to you. It's going to reiterate what I've told you, but it's just nice to hear it flow from the prosecutor at that time. I do not have the closing argument from Joseph Yanity, but I have the description of it within the means of the newspaper articles that I have. Also did an excellent job. So the jury was impaneled. Next one. This is the bill of particulars. It states basically what I've told you already, that on about the 20th day of October in 1962, he used in the county of Athens, premeditated malice, killed Helen Stees by striking her in and about the head with a hard object, causing some brain and cranial damage, and thereafter placed her in a steel drum, which said steel drum was punctured in order to admit water therein, and put said body of Helen Stees in said drum in a body of water sufficiently deep to completely submerge and drown, or drown the drum. Now, when he confessed, the police went out to try to find the drum. Anybody know Clyde Beasley, former police officer here? Okay. And Clyde was the first one on the scene looking for it. He was a scuba diver, and he went looking, was unsuccessful. But then they brought in the Fairfield County team, they brought in a team from Washington County, and then were able to locate the steel drum. They brought the drum up, I believe on Thursday, the 25th of October, and when they brought it up, there was a crowd of 200 people on shore watching this being conducted. So they brought it up, brought it in, and then I have a picture of the contents. I'm not going to show you the contents. Go ahead, next one. But that'll get to that. But we do have a picture of the drum with her inside. So the contents are gruesome, and that was, of course, admitted into evidence during the course of trial, and you're allowed to do that over objection of defense counsel. So we have Joe Yanity faced with a situation where his clients confessed a horrible, horrible crime. The issue is premeditation. And in 1962, what do you do for first-degree murder with premeditation? You ask for the death penalty. And I looked at the death penalty, and this was just after Jim Rhodes was elected governor in November of that year. And he did use the death penalty, not as rapidly as it was in the 1950s. It was at least every 2 weeks in the 1950s. It slowed down tremendously. I believe there were only 2 executions in Ohio in 1962, and that would vary during the course of the 1960s. Eventually, it was eliminated in 1970s and then came back to the state of Ohio. I know that because I have 2 individuals on death row at the current time who are facing the death penalty here in the state of Ohio. So this is a situation where Joe was the only obstacle between life and death for his client, Gene Stees. And I knew Joe back when he was an old guy like me, okay? And he was just a wonderful person, very good, worked with Judge Goldsberry back in the old days, and did a very good job. He was known as Crying Joe. And he would get emotional, and it was from his heart, though. It wasn't fake, it was from his heart. So he had the defense, and what he did was, I have to look at insanity. And he looked at it as a temporary insanity plea for his client. And then the other issue was it premeditated or was it not? That's the issue that was before the jury at that point in time. So let's go to the insanity plea. Insanity plea was requested, and then in December of 26th of 1962, Dr. Who was that? Yeah, doctor from the state said, he's just fine, okay? That's what always happens. They're just fine. Isn't that right, Pat? So Mr. McGee's back there. They said, he's just fine. So we went out, or he went out, Joe, and got 2 other psychologists to help him, psychiatrists, a Dr. Palmer and another doctor. Dr. Palmer was the one that came up with the diagnosis that if everything that Mr. Stees said was true about his life, then he could have been in a period of temporary insanity. The second psychiatrist they had wasn't helpful to the defense, wasn't helpful to the state. He wouldn't commit on temporary insanity, but he was there. And so we had the state with their own person saying he's sane. We had Dr. Palmer saying it could, if all the facts in this case were true, could be a case of temporary insanity. Next one. There's Judge Bolin. That's the player. Judge Bolin is described by Judge Goldsberry, a bit gruff. He would actually, back in the old days, if you wanted to get a divorce, you could actually lose your divorce case. Even if you... Nope, you're still married. And that happened, I know, to Judge Goldsberry. He told me one time, he went in and he and his client were there, and Judge Newcomb asked the other party, have you had relations with your husband since you filed for divorce? She said, yes. Case dismissed. And they remained married. So they changed that to where we're at today. If you read this, this is a time period piece. And the delicacy of which they talk about things is, when I looked at it, I said, this is really interesting, friendly, instead of saying, did you put her penis in your vagina, things like that. Those are things that I say when I ask questions. But this was just, they were friendly. And so that's how the questioning went during the course of this. Nobody was real explicit about anything. Next one, please. Homer Gall did a good job, young at this time. His son Bob is still here, and Homer was a good guy. Nobody disliked Homer Gall. He did a good job on this case, had a good, formidable defense counsel, did a good job, and I'm going to read you part of his closing argument, which I really enjoyed. And I'll read you the last part of what Joe Yanity did, and I'll preface what his defense was. Next one. Who's that? Joe Yanity. Who else does he look like from the 1960s? Perry Mason. Look at that. You go look at Raymond Burr, okay, when he thinned down a little bit, and you look at Joe Yanity, you see the two of them right there. Just amazing. And he was effective. Go right ahead. Next one. Trial fervor hits high as drum is introduced. Well, the trial goes. And let me tell you another little thing that's different than the present day. The offense occurred on October 20th, discovered. He gets charged later that week. This case is set down for trial on February, I believe it's the 5th, no, February 3rd of 1963. And in between that, you've had 3 psychological evaluations. So this is on the rocket docket, okay? And, I have, normal cases that can go for months on a breaking and entering. This case moved along at a rapid pace. And remember, the death penalty was a real option back then. It was getting less and less, but it was serious, and people from Athens County had received the death penalty for offenses that had occurred to them. Right now, I have a person on death row from the Lucasville riots from 1992, and he has a sentence of death, and they haven't no performance of that. I have another case from 2000, and he's still on death row. So those things don't move rapidly nowadays. And your trials can take a year, sometimes 18 months, to really try a capital case. And they've changed the law in reference to how you do this and what gets done on it. Of course, I always looked at the end of the case, and I saw what Joe Yanity got paid as a court-appointed attorney. He got paid a total of $2,400, which was about $24,000 in today's dollars. Not too bad for a court appointment back in those days. Of course, I would look that up, okay? I was interested in that. When the trial begins, they call in 10 witnesses for the state of Ohio, and they called the parents of Helen, and they were nice people from Ashland. They lived part-time in Shelby, North Carolina, and they came down and testified. We had the forensic person say that the blood found in the back of the station wagon matched the blood in Helen Stee's. They had the confession that had been ruled on to be allowed into evidence. And they also had the divers come in to talk about what had happened. And then they also brought in the drum. The drum was brought into the courtroom, and Joe Yanity in his closing argument complained that when they brought the drum in, they dumped it right in front of his client, right in front of the jury. And he objected to that and said that was just a showplace and for the deputies to embarrass his client. So he objected to that during his closing argument. The actual drum was there, not with her inside it, of course. And then they had the photographs of her. The other interesting thing is they brought in the other woman, Patricia Weathers. And she testified, and I have her love letters that she would send to Gene. She did not keep Gene's letters, but the letters start in May of 1962 and end in September. And it's really interesting to go through the letters. And I've just picked out a few things that I remarked on when I saw them. And one was from 6/18/62. She writes to him, "I'm in love, and I would just love to end my marriage," where she had 3 children, "and run away to Australia." Then she wrote in another one saying she would just like to run away and go to the Azores, which is a part of Portugal. And then she said, that same date, 6/18, "I want to marry you, and I want you to get a clean and fast divorce." He told her that his wife had filed for divorce and it was going to be over with very quickly. And remember, in those days, if you were a man, you didn't get custody. you were lucky to get every other weekend visitation. It was almost automatic. That's why Patricia could bring her 3 kids, bring them with her, and not have any problems thinking that her husband would get custody, because it just didn't happen back in those days. And then she also wrote, Patricia, to him, because he kept all the letters and the police found them. She said, "I want to marry you on the date of our kissing anniversary, our first kiss, which was 12/21 of 1961. She was a secretary in the education department and at Indiana University while he was working in the education department doing surveys and so forth for the education department. And they met there, but they didn't start dating or getting friendly until mid-May of 1962. So during this time, there was a lot of turmoil in the marriage between Helen and Jean. Helen was a nurse, but she was also a very strict fundamentalist. She went to that Grace Church, Grace College, and basically they were opposed to drinking coffee, alcohol, going to the movies, or watching TV that wasn't something religious. And so she had a real dislike for Ohio University. She described it as a godless university. So she must have been at the Smiling Skull at one time or another. So that's how she described it. And a nice lady, a good mother, and we've tried to find out what's happened to the children. Billy, who was 6 at the time this terrible incident happened, has passed away from what we can find at 2010. I cannot find what happened to Kathy. She was 5 at the time. That's their daughter. We can't find anything, so I'm assuming she's alive, and she would be about 69 years old at the current time. So there should be somebody surviving. Patty Weathers has passed. She moved back to Florida with her husband, Jack, when he came to pick her up in Athens the day after Labor Day, 1962. And she relocated down there. Jack passed away. He was in the military, then got a job down south in Jacksonville, Florida. And all we know is when he passed, he didn't talk about her as his loving wife. There was somebody else in their place. So we don't know what happened to Patty. I'm assuming she has passed at the current time. Jean Stees was born on January 20th, 1932. So I called up, and I'll talk about this later, I called up the U.S. Marshal's office, and I said, "Are you guys still looking for him? You'll see this later on." And they said, "He's still open. They're not devoting a lot of resources. Bob, we don't got a lot of resources for this." But I said, "Hey, we did put it in the paper, and you'll see this later as to that wanted poster. And so I'm going to ask you at the end how we're going to find them, okay? We'll get to that." So they go to trial. The state presents their witnesses, and then it's up to Joe Yanity to present his defense. And he called Jean Stees to the stand. And Jean testified about his life. Now, you heard the terrible things, the awful things he did to his wife, and everybody here would probably think, well, that would probably warrant a death penalty, and at that point in time. But what Joe did is he went into his history. His father, oh, you got the barrel, okay. Did I jump ahead? Yeah. Okay, well, here's a picture of the barrel that was introduced in the evidence. That was introduced during the course of the trial. Next one, a better picture of the barrel. I won't show you the contents. Next one. And then reveal surprise at Steve's trial. So during the trial, she wasn't killed by the blow to her head with the crowbar. And the crowbar was there, and there was testimony from Dr. Main stating that it was there because he was repairing a closet downstairs. The death was caused by asphyxiation when he put that bag over her head to stop the blood flow. So at the time she was put into the barrel, she may or may not have been alive. By the time she went into the lake, she had passed because there was no water found in her lungs. Go ahead. Other woman called in Steve's murder trial. So they cross-examined her and put on the evidence of the letters. He had pictures. Gene, had pictures of her, the svelte, doe-eyed, slender brunette, on his piano in the living room of Dr. Main's house. He had pictures in his bedroom of her and still maintained her love letters. He claimed during his testimony that he had not he thought it was all over. I suspect that probably it wasn't all over in his mind because he was still sending her letters as of October. She testified. She was a little shifty testifying, but what I did love hearing in the letters was, I want to be with you, I love you, but I don't want to ruin my husband, and we need about $3,100, which is $31,000 in our things, in order to take care of our debts. Now, as my secretaries, this is not me, my secretary said, maybe she was playing him along. That wouldn't be my thought, but that's what she thought, trying to get money out of him at that point in time. And he didn't give her any, and they did split, though you could see the progression in May when they're in love. August, she's going to leave, go back to Jack, but then she comes back. He picks her up from Shelby, North Carolina, and takes her back with her 3 children to move in with him for a week. They stayed at the OU guest house for 3 days initially, and then they got into the house located on Baker Road out there. And then her husband came to collect her. Next one, go ahead. Testimony from the psychologist is that he could have lost his sanity. So that depended on what evidence came out during the trial. So here's the evidence that Joe Yannity presented. He was an orphan. Next picture, go ahead. That's his father. He was convicted of murder in 1933. So Gene C.'s dad was convicted of murder in 1933, killed a grocery clerk, and went and did 15 years in prison. So that destroyed the family. When he was 1 year old, one and a half, he was then placed in an orphanage in Pennsylvania. He and his other brothers were also in an orphanage. His wife said the mother couldn't handle them and sent them away after her father or her husband got convicted of murder. He lived in an orphanage, would run from there, come back, and there's a lot of detail in the testimony about how difficult his life was. At one time, he said his best friend was age 7, that they took him away from the orphanage, and he went to live with another family, and that hurt him, and he ran away from the orphanage. He would run to his mother's house, which was some miles away. His mother would always take him back to the orphanage, and he just didn't understand. At age 15, he found out that his father was alive for the first time. Had no knowledge of that. So Joe brought this out during the course of the trial, telling the jury, and it was composed of all males. For some reason, no females got on the jury at that time, and they were allowed, but it just turned out to be all men. And I think Joe tailored his testimony to that to some extent. The information was that he found out his father's first alive when he's 15, felt that he was rejected all of his life. Anybody he loved rejected him, and that was part of the defense. The psychologist talked to him, and they felt that something could set him off to where he was temporarily insane. If you ever want to watch an excellent movie about a murder trial, it's with Jimmy Stewart, George C. Scott, 1959. It's called Anatomy of a Murder. Just superb, and it's about as realistic as you can get in regards to how a defense attorney gets a defense from his client. And so rewatch it again if you get a chance to do so. It's excellent. Also has Ben Gazzara as a lieutenant murdering somebody. And also Lee Remick at her hottest back then, okay? or doe-eyed, I don't know what you would call her. go ahead, next one. So I'll get to that. So he brought out the fact that he left the orphanage, got side jobs, and then he said he became in his words, a hobo. And he traveled the country by himself. That may go to some questions I have at the end of this case. Was able to live on his own, able to fend for himself and travel the countryside. But he was not stupid. He was very smart and went back to Harrison, lived with his grandparents when he was over 18 and got an education. Received a college degree. He finished it at Grace because it was unaccredited, and then he had to go to Indiana University. They let him in there. And from there, he was able to get his master's degree after all these troubles. So he worked hard. Married Helen in 1956. 2 children came very quickly. And at that point in time, he was going to hopefully have a happy existence. Got his job at Ohio University. And at that point in time, the defense says that he went back up after Helen and he reconciled for periods of time. He'd go back up to Ashland, Ohio, where she was living with her parents. This was after Patricia Weathers left, and he would go back up there and bring her back and to Athens. And then he brought her back on October 20th. They were going to meet. They met in Columbus, and he said he was trying to reconcile with her. And remember, in a jury trial, when you have a deceased person and you only have the murderer there, you only get the murderer's side of the story. So that's what you had. His side of the story, as a former persecutor, not prosecutor, persecutor, isn't that correct?
You do a lot of persecuting.
All right. At that point in time, there would be some questions that I would have about his story. But his story was as follows. He went up to try to reconcile with Helen. He went up and went up to Columbus bus station, picked her up. They drove back. And when they drove back, they talked about her current pregnancy. Now, I didn't describe this earlier, but she had had a tubular pregnancy that they had to abort back in October and November of 1961. And after that time, he claims that he did not have sex with her under any circumstances. But she suddenly became pregnant in April or May, according to him, of 1962. And when they came back down, she said she was 4 to 5 months pregnant, that she was going to give birth to the child, not give the child up for adoption. That's what his story was. And that if he did not accept that child, he was never going to see his 2 other children again. And at that point in time, he says he didn't remember what happened. He picked up a crowbar that was there when he was fixing the closet, hit her on the head, and didn't remember what had occurred. Didn't remember all the details of what happened. Now, let me read you what the closing argument of Homer was at that point in time. He talked about the killings, he talked about what the facts of the case were, and he said as follows. The states proved that this college man arranged to have his wife Helen Stees come to Athens, Ohio, October 20th, 1962. She left Ashland, Ohio on that date with hopes of reconciliation with this defendant in Athens, Ohio. She was alive when she left. The defendant met her in Columbus, brought her to Dr. Main's farm in Athens County, parked the car out front, went inside. As she stepped inside the door, he hit her over the head from behind with a crowbar, knocking her unconscious. This is in his first initial statements to the police, not when he gave his confession. While she was still breathing, in order to snuff out her life in a hurry, he put a large piece of plastic around the front of her head and wrapped it and twisted it in the neck. This would not take long, and he said he would be rid of her. He calmly listened to the football game, the OU football game, put the body and the evidence in a drum, moved his station wagon to the side of the house, placed the drum containing her body and the evidence in a station wagon, then moved the station wagon out behind the house. Then he cleaned the hallway as best he could and moved a saw table back to that area to prevent the bloody wallpaper from being seen. As soon as darkness came, he took her to Dow Lake, left the drum near the boat docks where other drums were at and wouldn't be noticed, and drove back to Athens, then walked back to Dow Lake, stole the boat, rowed it to deep water, dumped the body and the evidence in the lake, and the job was complete. This wouldn't be found because there were holes in the drum that he placed. The crime without a body, he said he had cleaned the crime scene. He thought if there was no body, they couldn't convict him of murder. That's what he initially told the police before they gave his formal confession. He changed his story later. He cleaned the hallway, the wallpaper, and he walked back to Athens to get the car and returned home. Now he was a free man, Homer said. Lo and behold, the next day he noticed he had forgotten a piece of evidence, the crowbar. What did he do? He disposed of that in deep water, the Ohio River. Now the weapon is gone, but he forgot about the blood in the rear of his station wagon. That's understandable. She bled quite a bit out there at the farm. There were rugs in the hallway which could absorb the blood, and he cleaned the hallway and put the rugs in the drum and disposed of the body, not thinking any blood would be found in the station wagon. But much to his surprise, the alert law enforcement officers saw this mud and blood, and the blood tested, and it matched Helen's. It had been discovered. He admitted he killed Helen and the location of the body. He admitted the crowbar too, and admitted he had thrown that in the Ohio River, but he didn't mention the plastic. Maybe he thought the water in Dow Lake would loosen it and it wouldn't be discovered on her face. He told the officers the purpose of Helen's coming to Athens was reconciliation, while all the time he had been writing Pat Weathers expressing his love for her and desire to marry her. Even had pictures which you can look at. They introduced them into evidence in the jury room. He had letters from various places. He had pictures of Pat. Also, he hated his wife because she disapproved of drinking, smoking, dancing, and so on. This is not consistent with reconciliation. All these pictures and letters in the house, and he asked his wife to come down for a reconciliation. This is hard to believe. Members of the jury, I want you to find him guilty of premeditated murder. Joe Yannity, outraged by this. No premeditation whatsoever. No evidence of premeditation. And the issue is, what requires premeditation? Do you have to plan for a day, 2 days? Well, the jury instructions read, and they still read today when you have a jury, premeditation can occur pretty quickly. What they argued in the second part is that when he hit her with the crowbar, she may have still been alive. When he put the bag around her head, he made sure she was dead. That was the premeditation. So the issue becomes then one of mercy. So the court had given to the jury 6 different charges for them to decide whether or not he was guilty. Number 1, first-degree murder with premeditation. Number 2, first-degree murder, premeditation, but with mercy. That would save you from the death penalty. Number 3, murder, purposely killing another. That time it was 15 to life, 25 to life or death if you got premeditation. Next one was manslaughter, just a throwaway charge to put in. The 5th charge was not guilty by reason of insanity. And the court went through the definitions of what insanity was. It's not be able to tell the difference between right and wrong in essence. And they went through that detail, and they got a jury charge, and were told what to look at in that regard. And so the psychiatric evidence wasn't real strong. It was, if you believed all the fact of the rejection and his loneliness, rejection of loved ones, that when his wife supposedly told him that you would never see your kids again, he went temporarily sane, hit her with the crowbar, and then Joe Yannity claimed he always wanted to turn himself in, but just never came around to doing it. Of course, that was... that's what Gene testified to. He was going to turn himself in, you know, mere evidence, putting holes in the drum, throwing a crowbar, you know. So that's what you're looking at. So, but Joe did a good job. He was outraged by the fact they put the drum out there, outraged by the fact that they didn't have any premeditation, and he did a good closing argument that I can read in the paper. Roy Cross, if you know old Roy, was a messenger reporter, wonderful writer. Did you know Roy? You knew him. No, you didn't know Roy? You should have. He was great. And he was here when I started. And so that was the defense. And so if you could get a conviction that did not deal with death, you won that case. It's like when I get a case where they don't get the death penalty, I get congratulated by people, good job, Bob, and I go, wait, my guy's going to spend the rest of his life in prison. So, but they say, oh, you won the case. I go, well, really? I don't know if that's true or not. But that's you don't have much of a hurdle. If you do a death penalty case, you don't get the death penalty. You're congratulated on being a genius if they don't get the death penalty. So Joe had those facts, did a good job on his closing, talked about this, talked about, really what a sad life he had. And what Joe said, I liked very much. And he said in his closing this, because it goes state, you heard what Homer said, then the defense gets their chance to do their closing, then the state gets to come back and argue one more time. I'll tell you a good story. When I was under Dave Fry, I was 25 years old, my first case, he sat up there with me. It was a misdemeanor, a contributing case, and we did closing arguments. I'd done 3 years of law school, passed the bar. I did my closing argument. The defense, Tom Korn, did his, and then he nudged me on the side. You gonna go again? Says, I mean, I get to talk again? And I loved it. I said, this is great. So I like being a prosecutor. I enjoyed that. And I wasn't at a loss for words at that point in time. But here's how Joe ended his case to the jury. And he talked about, also during the jury trial, that Helen had supposedly been deceitful to him, that she was carrying the child of another person. And this was in front of a jury of 12 men. So he was nudging it towards that, bringing those facts out, trying to make the jury, according to what Jean says, that she's pregnant, couldn't have been him, and he was looking for an abortion. She wouldn't do it. She wouldn't give the child up for adoption. And she told him, if you don't accept this last child as your own, you'll never see the children again, which was a real threat back in 1962. And at that point in time, that's the argument that Joe had to where he became temporarily insane. And he said the following on closing argument. He quoted the Sermon on the Mount. And he said, the Lord said, be merciful, be just. He reminded the jury that you're all going to meet that man, the Lord, someday, so you better be right. That was the end of his closing argument. Well, not to be outdone, Homer came back, and he came back and he talked about this. And he did his closing argument, contradicting what we've talked about to some extent. And he says the last two paragraphs, and I just enjoyed listening to him talk, and this is good. That's why he gets an A and Joe gets an A. This is his second closing. There's been a great deal of testimony in this case about creating sympathy. Let's consider Helen too. While she was bleeding to death in the hallway after he had struck her with a crowbar, she was still breathing. Her pulse could be felt. Did he help her? No. The comment that he wanted to be caught, how can you believe that when he goes to all the trouble of putting the body and the evidence from the resident of Dr. Main's farm into this drum, dumping it into Dow Lake, cleaned out the hallway at the Main farm, scrubbing the wallpaper, the floor, putting the new table in front of the area where he had cleaned the wallpaper and it was still wet. Discovers the crowbar and throws it in the river. Are you going to believe that he wanted to be caught? He was a fox. Maybe he just slipped up. Forgiveness of God. On the stand, he said that after he struck Helen, he asked for God's forgiveness. I hope God does forgive him, but that is not the function of the jury. Your function is to sit here, hear the evidence, judge it on the facts and the law of the state of Ohio. This sympathy and other statements asking for your mercy, all I can say, members of the jury, is show him the same mercy he showed Helen, and that is death. That was the closing argument. The jury went out, and this is I got this from Judge Goldsberry. This is the old Athens Hotel. I called him up on the phone a couple of weeks ago. I said, "Where's this Athens Hotel?" And he said, "It's right across from the Berry Hotel." And of course, he knows everything about it. And I talked to the staff up here. They were great. They got me pictures. So this is the old hotel. This is where the jury went out on Friday. They were sequestered down the street. And this is right where Attractions is and Les Cornwell's office is. They've changed it, of course. But that was the Athens Hotel. They were sequestered there overnight, deliberated on it. I think they were just deliberating, quite frankly, between mercy and no mercy. I think that was the issue. Because there was a compelling case about this man's life. And one thing Joe did say, and it was telling, it says, when he talked about the orphanages, not knowing his father and running away and being discarded, he said, is this any way to start a life? Is this any way to start this crazed and mixed up life? Is what he talked about. So that, that affected him. That affected the jury. So they came back, found him guilty with mercy. And that leads us to the second part of the story. Go. Oh, I love this. Now look, here's the names of the jurors. These are the jurors on the case. See if I don't know any of them. Wayne Wingett, Frank Hartley, Fred Elliott, Leonard Mattman, Raymond Connor, H.W. Link, Robert Fick, Harold Nana, Harley Allen, Thomas O'Dew, Donald E. Fisk, James T. Hellier. So those are all the jurors who had decided this case. I found that fascinating. They could find that. They found them guilty. I just put it out there. I said, maybe somebody knows a relative or somebody else. I knew somebody on the jury panel, but they didn't get selected. Next one. And that's where they signed their guilty verdict. Next one. And then that's the judgment entry. They found him guilty, gave him life. I mean, it was quick. He was on the road to Ohio State Penn by Monday morning. Go ahead. And here is the Ohio State Penitentiary. That was right across from Nationwide Arena. And if you look there, there's still an arch, beautiful arch that's still there. And keep going, show the other ones. That shows you the whole complex of how huge it was. Okay? Big, big prison. Right on Spring Street, right in that area, right downtown Columbus. And that's when the Short North was someplace you didn't want to be, okay? You didn't want to go out on Short North in the 1960s and go anywhere trying to get to the Ohio State campus. What a change. What a miraculous change the way it is now. Go ahead. And that shows another one. So I'm guessing he goes to prison. We're done with the case. Now he's up there in prison. He's got life in prison. Now what's life mean? Well, he gets to go to a parole board 20, 25 years for killing your spouse. If you're a woman, you get out, you're about 15. You get a 10-year discount for killing your husband, okay? And based on my experience. So this is where he was at. He was brilliant, nice fellow, got along with people, industrious, worked his way up from absolutely nothing, no help whatsoever. And I think he worked in one of the warden's offices in one of these buildings here. And if you note, there are doors that go outside. So he's an honored, he's the trustee, and they wear tan outfits back at the time. And so he's wearing a tan outfit. It is February 21st of 1970. So about 7 years later, he's up there. And he's in trustee status, working in the warden's office, filing things. We believe it's a Saturday. I get two different reports. Somebody say the 18th to 21st. The official record's the 21st. And he walks out the door. Nobody sees him. He walks out the door, and he's gone. Gone from the prison. Okay? Show me that little key I've got here. Got that? Give that to me. One of my old clients, you can come up and look at it, used to work at the Ohio State Pen. He gave me a key to it. Okay, so I got a key to the Ohio State Pen right here, okay? And the history of this is interesting. Ohio State Pen was like a sieve. He was not the only prisoner to walk out that year. There was another prisoner who killed a deputy in Adams County. He walked away. They caught him. Mr. Stees is still on the loose, okay? And so we have this, he walks out the door, and he's not stupid. So let's talk about his history. And where could he be? Well, he called himself a hobo. Well, a homeless person. Knew how to fend for himself. He didn't have to know where the next meal was coming from. He was aware of where it was going to come. He was going to panhandle it or get it someplace else. So he knew how to ride the rails. Where were the rail yards? Rail yards were half a mile from here, if even that far. He could have gone on a rail. Could have saved up money from his check. They didn't get much, but he could have had $50 to $100 out of his check for 7 years and saved it up. Could have got a bus ticket about 1.5 miles down the road and got on a bus and left. They didn't know he was gone until that call Saturday evening when they did the head count. So he had about a 6-hour head start. Harold Shields wasn't notified till sometime later that week that he had escaped. And then they put it in the bulletin system and so forth. Remember, this is not the internet. This is your old, you hardly even had a fax machine, okay? And you know, that you got bulletins and you'd send it out by wire. That's about it. And he was gone. Where did he go? Keep going. Okay, still at large after escape. That's Roy Cross. He talks about that. And he's missing. That's what he looked like. So he's 31 at the time, smart, street savvy. He has relations in Pennsylvania. They check him out. I called the U.S. Marshal's office. They don't give me many details, but they gave me some, saying we're still looking for him. But he didn't go with Patricia Weathers. She was down in Florida with her husband. To our knowledge, he didn't have any contact with his children that we know of, but we don't know what happened when they were adults. He could have gotten another identity. How did you get an identity in 1970? Well, you could go in, quite frankly, if you went into an Amish area and said, I was home birthed. I do not have a birth certificate. They would hand that out like candy. And you get a birth certificate. Once you get a birth certificate, you can then go to the driver's bureau and say, I need a driver's license. And they would give you a driver's license. Now, I was thinking about, was it easy for him to get a passport? I looked it up, and they started using photographs on passports in 1915. There was another way to do it, and that's in the old movies where they go to the graveyard, look for an infant who passed away, about their age, take that identity. But that deals with localities, and somebody may know in the registrar's office that family that you're claiming was your own or the infant. So that had a risk in and of itself. But you can do that, and you can maintain other identities. There's a case in Cleveland I looked up. How can somebody get away from the system for 50, 60 years? Well, in 1969, there was a man named Theodore Chandler, and he took $215,000 from the Society Bank in Cleveland. Walked out the door, age 20, put it all in a little paper sack that he had, $215,000, which is now worth $1.8 million. Okay, so he took out a quite sizable sum, was never found. In 2021, he had cancer, was passing away, and told his daughter in Massachusetts who he really was. And he asked him to promise about a year, don't tell anybody for a year. But his obituary got in, it was sent up to the U.S. Marshal's office in Cleveland, and there had been a father and son who had been looking for him for 50 years. They saw the obit and saw that he had mentioned his real father and real mother in the obituary. Now, he'd been dead for 6 months when they found him, but he got away with it. He was a local golf pro, and he sold Land Rovers and Subarus in suburban Boston. Got away with it, and just picked up another name. I don't think he got a birth certificate. He just found another name. Another name was Whitey Bulger. Everybody know Whitey Bulger? Based on the movie character in The Departed, Jack Nicholson. He went out, and he was a brilliant man, a little twisted, but he went out and, he went out and established an identity years before he got caught. He was an informant, informing on the Italian mob while he was committing all sorts of murders, crimes, extortion in the Boston area, and he had the FBI agents on his side. He had one on the payroll. And in 1994, he was informed by one of his FBI agents, hey, they got an indictment for RICO against you. And he said, well, I'm 65. I don't need to live out a RICO indictment. So he took off, and he took off with his girlfriend. Now, with his wife at that, common-law wife. And they brought her back, dumped her, and picked up another girlfriend and took her with him. And they eventually settled in the Santa Monica area, got an apartment that they paid monthly for in cash. And if you ever been to Santa Monica Pier, he was 1 block away from the Santa Monica Pier, which is one of the most pretty places on earth. You walk up and down, you've got a beautiful beach. He traveled all over, didn't go international, but he traveled all over looking for him. And he was on the run for 16 years. And how did he do it? Well, he had established that identity years before. Had credit cards, names, business organizations under Tom Baxter's name. And that's what he used. But he then didn't go out and get a driver's license where he might have been caught, didn't get a passport where he might have been caught, and paid cash living inside the home. When the FBI agents found him, and they found him not through him, he was on America's Most Wanted at least 2 times, they found him through his girlfriend, Catherine Garrick. And they said her habits are to get her hair done. She looks like this. She likes this particular hairstyle, so forth and so on. And they advertised it on daytime TV. And somebody said, I know her. She goes to my beauty salon. And then they found him, got him arrested, found $800,000 inside his apartment. And they asked him, well, how come you got all these coupons in there too? And he said, hey, you got to make it last, okay? And then he eventually got arrested. So the point of this, keep going, if you will. Wanted and missing. See this? This came from I got him up there. This is from Cuyahoga County Sheriff's Office. Agency case number, scar in the right eye. Last known was February 21st, 1970. That's Gene Stees. They said now 93, he's now 94 since his birthday was January 20th. So he is on the loose. He could still be alive. Who just passed away when they're 95? Robert Duvall, okay? So he could possibly be Jeff Epstein's dad. That's what I'm alleging. that could be getting everybody impetus to do all this. You have all sorts of conspiracy. There's no sense anymore. Any conspiracy theory will do it. That's what I'm alleging. And so I have set forth something here. This is the last panel, the last thing I have to say. Go ahead and show it. Wanted dead or alive. $1,000 reward. That's actual cash money from me. If you can get money and tell me if he's alive or if he's dead. Get me the proof. I'll give you $1,000. Look at that. Right there. That's real money. Justice. And you know what I've got right here? Not guilty. See that? You've seen that before. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. If you have questions, ask me. Thank you.